Guys, I am pretty excited to bring you the sequel to Restoration. I'm starting to record this at about the 1 year mark from when I released that. Go check out the Reddit of the author, which will be in the description. User Zethero. A demon tried to kill me once. Now I hunt demons. I got off the bus and lit up my cigarette. My brother had given me the address, as he often does when he finds me in nearby possession. Just benefits of being connected to the Catholic Church, I guess. I thumb the iron ring on my right-hand finger. I make my way to the front porch. The mailbox reads Porter. I flick my cigarette at it before I open the door without knocking, and I head on in. A few folks huddle around the door at the top of the stairs. All of them seem concerned. The sounds of a priest and the garbling wail of some poor bastard inside. I walk past them. Each of them stare at me confused. "Who the hell are you?" a woman asked. "The wife of the possessed? Or maybe the mother. She could be either. I'm here to help," I say as a young priest bursts out of the room, with some rather putrid vomit on his vestments. "Don't go inside. Father Smith has it all under control." More shouting and the sound of more demonic garbling and laughter come from behind the door. It sounds like he's got a handle on it, but if you don't mind, I'd like to have a crack at it, I tell the priest as I walk past him. The priest grabs the doorknob, attempting to open the door himself. "No, He's struggling. "The door! It's locked!" He attempts to tug on the doorknob before he shouts in pain. His hands appear burned. As I go to touch the doorknob, I notice it's red hot. I tap my ring against it, and it cools immediately and unlocks itself. "If you don't mind?" I open up the door and close it behind me. The door locks as I walk in. I'm hit with a putrid smell as I walk in. There's vomit covering the bed and the priest standing on the side of it, who is also reading from the Bible. A man is convulsing and writhing around on the bed. He looks middle-aged, dark skin, and an unkempt beard over his face. His eyes roll into the back of his head and nasty vomit covers his beard, along with what I'm pretty sure is feces. The priest looks up to me, surprised. "Who are you?" I shrug. "I'm just a guy here to kick the demon out of whatever sorry sap it hopped into." I throw the soiled sheets off the bed and straddle the guy's chest. "What in God's name are you doing?" the priest protests. "Are you mad?" The man, in a harsh demonic voice, chuckles. "Foolish mortal, what can you do that this priest cannot?" "Well, this for one." I press my fist against his forehead, making sure that the ring is planted firmly against his flesh. The demon screams as the guy arches his back and his writhing intensifies. "What is this?" it screams. I lean down and whisper into its ear. "Calvary." He bucks up and down, doing his best to throw me off like some kind of wild bronco. I hold firmly onto him with my thighs, noticing that with each buck in an attempt to push me off, he's growing weaker and weaker. A few more moments of writhing and plenty of inhuman screaming. The guy goes limp. I keep my ring pressed against his forehead for another moment or two before removing it and then getting off of him. An even more foul stench comes from the bed as I inspect the guy who's gone limp and is now snoring. A brown stain is spreading onto the sheets from beneath him. Did he? The priest holds up a cloth to his face, covering his nose. Soil himself? Yeah. The priest turns to me. The demon made him eat his own excrement, thus the putridness of the room. "These folks got a bathroom?" I asked, noticing that my hand must have come into contact with this guy's scraggly beard. "Who are you?" he asks. "I'm someone who kicks demons out of people." I show him the iron ring on my finger, then I walk out of the room. "Is Rain gonna be okay?" a woman asks. I walk out, stopping at the bathroom to wash my hands. After a change of pants, a long shower, and a moment to reflect in the mirror, he'll be fine. Probably. With little else to do, I walk out. "What do you mean, probably? You can't just come into our home and—" "Gina, please," the priest interrupts. "You're making a fool of yourself." The priest looks at me. "I demand you tell me who you are." I light up another cigarette and I turn to him. "Well, I'm someone who's not against you." The priest raises an eyebrow and smiles a bit. "I see. God bless you." Expecting to have spent a little more time here, I walked down the street to the next bus stop. I needed to get a car. That's about when my phone starts to ring. Hello?
Get your ass home now.
My father's gruff voice comes over the phone. Hey, Dad, I said as I pull another drag from my cigarette.
Did you see the news?
No, I was a little bit preoccupied, I explained.
Jerusalem got attacked. It's the beginning of the end, just like that angel said.
I nod, trying to make a smoke ring. I failed, as usual. Yep, I know.
I already called your brother. He's on his way.
Yep, I sighed, taking another inhale.
I've got the bunker prepped. When you get here, we'll seal ourselves down there and wait out the apocalypse.
Sure thing, Dad. I'll see you soon. Mom is yelling in the background.
Damn it, Fred. Please don't pester the boys. Sandy, for the love of God, get the canned food down in the bunker.
Is the last thing I heard him say before the call ended. I shove the phone back in my pocket and I start to the nearest train station. Dad's going off the deep end isn't news, and I can't blame him. Ever since my brother and I were kids and had a run-in with the Prince of Hell, he's been twitchy. I guess that's where the story should start, huh? It seemed like a normal school night. We were sound asleep when my mother came into the room with a strange request for us. Wake up, kids, she told us. I need you both to drink this, okay? I looked to my mother's hazel eyes as she looked at us with a calm yet urgent manner. What is it? My older brother asked. It's blessed water. I need you both to have a drink, okay? My brother didn't seem put off, and neither of us thought Mom was the cultist sort, so we took a drink of the water she gave us. The best description I can give the stuff was pure, and that's how I felt after. Relaxed, content, and pure. Okay, boys, back to bed, okay? She gave us both a kiss on the forehead and she left the room. Without thinking about it, I passed out again. Later that evening, we woke up to the sound of a loud banging on the front door. Mom was shouting downstairs. My brother and I ran out of our rooms. Oh, look, there are the children. An older man's voice wheezed. Standing in the doorway was a guy in a white suit and a wide-brimmed hat. I couldn't see much of him other than this sick grin as he stared down at my mother. She was holding a shotgun, but his free hand was holding the barrel, keeping it pointed away from him. Now the fun can begin, whore. He grabbed my mother's hand and, out of nowhere, it began to burn with a blue flame. He recoiled in pain, screaming in this inhuman voice as his hand turned black. With that, my mom pointed the gun back at him. Now back the fuck off, asshole! The guy in the white hissed at my mother, but then his grin returned. I would have had fun with you. Used the kids as leverage to turn you into my own personal little concubine. But now, well, it seems you must burn. Mom shut the door in his face and ran upstairs. Kids, get back to bed, okay? Everything is fine. There was some rustling in the garage, and the sound of snapping against the door followed. Mom ran down to the door and tried to open it, but try as she might, it couldn't budge. What the hell? I spotted the guy in white running past the front window. Mom! I shouted and pointed. She looked to the front door. Soon, the snapping noises came from behind it. She rushed to the door and, just like the garage, it refused to give. Oh my god, kids, get out the back door, hurry! By the time my brother and I had even gotten to the base of the stairs, the snaps were at the back door. That's when we spotted the man in white at the windows. He used Dad's nail gun to secure the windows shut. Mom grabbed both of us and rushed to the house phone. Shit, it's dead. She hung up. There was more snapping outside at each window. Mom gripped us when the man in white walked his way back to the front window. I'll always remember his yellow glowing eyes as he held up the gas can. His muffled voice echoing through the glass. If you don't want to burn in hell, you'll burn the normal way. He lit a match. Remember, this is all your dear father's doing. The flames rose around him, and soon they were outside of each window. Come on, kids, we gotta go downstairs. Mom shouted and rushed us into the basement. She locked the door at the top of the steps and hit the lights. Kids, go turn on the water in the utility sink. and get Mom all the towels, okay? The smoke detector started to beep harshly upstairs as we set to work. I started to get all the towels while my brother turned on the sink, all while the smoke started to seep from under the door to the stairs. My mother grabbed a towel from me, soaked it, and ran it upstairs. She shoved it under the door, then came back downstairs and started soaking more towels. Kids, do you remember when I told you not to build that blanket fort and you did anyway? Well, guess what? You're allowed to now. The smoke detectors began to make this weird whining noise as the heat from the flames outside started to melt them. Despite mine and my brother's best efforts, we weren't able to get the towels to stick together. Mom, I found a blanket, my brother proclaimed as he pulled out a rather ratty-looking thing out of the corner of the basement. Mom picked it up and looked at the door at the top of the stairs. The door was smoking now. Okay, I guess beggars can't be choosers. Mom spent the next couple of minutes washing the blanket as best as she could. While it was still wet, she pulled it out of the sink and turned off the water. She grabbed a flashlight, and as she did, all the lights turned off. Okay, kids, come under the blanket, alright? There was a crash outside, and me, being 10, I started to cry. It'll be okay, boys. Mom is here, and we have the blanket, right? It'll protect us. More popping, crashing, and burning noises echoed from the top of the stairs. My brother looked to my mom and asked her, Mom, are we gonna die? My stomach dropped as I turned to her, hoping she had some kind of answer. She held us both tightly and shook her head. No, babies, we'll be alright. We're just giving the firefighters time to come save us, okay? They will come and hack through the door and they'll find us down here. You'll get hot cocoa when this is all over, okay? When you're a kid, sometimes you can understand when your parents are lying to you. This was one of those times. I didn't want to cry anymore. I had done that. So I just laid my head on my mother's lap and curled up there, the wet blanket on my legs. Glass shattered upstairs and the sound of a roaring fire intensified. We felt a rush of hot air hit the blanket. Mom poked her head out in time to see the towel that was shoved under the door at the base of the stairs. The door itself was burning now, with the top of the staircase just enveloped in flames and smoke. That's when I saw the face looking at us through the basement window. Those yellow eyes burned into my memory as he grinned wickedly. He waved. The sick fuck waved to me before he just vanished. Now, with the basement filling with smoke, Mom closed the blanket and pushed us to the floor. Grab the towel, kids. The ones we got wet and put over your mouth, okay? It'll protect us from the smoke. We just need to hang on till firemen come. Mom instructed us. I did what I was told, just hoping Mom knew what she was doing. My older brother was lying on the other side of Mom, and she had her arms over each one of our shoulders. That's when I heard a door open up and someone walked in. My mom lifted the blanket to see who was there, and, well, what happened next shocked me. Standing in the middle of the room, wearing a black trench coat, jeans, and a pair of heavy gray boots, stood a man, a little over 6 feet tall. He had black hair and bright blue eyes. The second I saw him, he began to walk over to us, kneeling down to my mother. Mrs. Macchione, I'm an associate of your husband. I'm here to help. Who are you? Mom questioned. The man motioned to the doorway behind him. And I don't mean he pointed to the doorway upstairs or the sealed Bilko doors. I mean he pointed to a new doorway that was not there a few moments ago. Come with me, please, the man implored. The smoke was burning my eyes and I looked for Mom to say okay. That man set our house on fire and tried to do God knows what to me. How do I know you aren't with him? She asked. You need to trust me, he explained. Mom shook her head. I don't have any reason to trust you. For all I know, she coughed. You have an even worse fate for me behind that door. With that, the man stood up. He looked around and then he looked at my mother. Exasperated, in one quick motion he removed his trench coat. The smoke billowing around him parted, and the flames on the ceiling cooled as these huge silvery white wings spread out from his back. Through the haze of the smoke, the wings were so bright they appeared to be glowing. Oh my God, was all my mom could say. It stunned her to silence. The angel held out his hand and said, "Come with me, please." Mom took his hand, nodding dumbly, and we walked towards the open doors. Mom stared at the angel, likely unsure whether she was alive or dead. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure we survived either. As the three of us walked through the doors with the angel following behind us, we stared in shock at what was before us. Past the doors was just an absolutely massive room. It was a cathedral. White marble seemed to comprise every single surface, from the doors to the ceiling and even the walls. The lights were dim, but what they illuminated most was a pair of huge statues, a pair of angels. The one on the right was a woman, with a serene face and a huge staff. To her left stood another angel. This one's face was obscured by a dark cowl, and in place of the staff, it had a sword, held between two hands, the point resting on the ground at its feet. Each statue was over 30 feet tall. The doors closing behind us broke our reverence. This place isn't much, but it's far better than it used to be, thanks to your husband. My mother turned to him in shock. "You know Fred?" The angel put his trench coat back on, concealing his wings. "Yes, I hired him to restore this temple." He extended his hand. "My name is Timothy Crestfall." My mother took his hand. "Sandra Macchione, these are my boys, Colin and Trevor." My older brother Colin looked at Timothy in awe. "Hi, Mr. Angel." "Timothy is just fine, young man." He smiled, then turned to my mother. "I'm glad to see Belial didn't harm you." "Belial? Is that the nutjob who tried to burn down our house?" My mother regained her senses. After the shock of seeing this angel that saved us seemed to wear off. "You need to explain yourself, mister. What have you gotten my family mixed up in?" "Mrs. Macchione, don't blame St. Timothy, please." A Latino voice shouted from behind a plywood barrier. "Jorge?" my mom said. "Jorge, how are ya?" Colin smiled and looked confused. Jorge was a day worker my father often picked up. Colin used to speak middle school Spanish to him, just as a courtesy when my dad would swing by from job sites while Jorge was still in the truck. On a few occasions, my mom would offer him a drink or a beer. I never understood him since I didn't speak Spanish. Jorge smiled. "I'm fine. Colin, Trevor, how are you? You listening to your mother and father?" I nodded. "Yes, Jorge." Then I frowned. "Jorge, when did you learn to speak English?" He smiled at us. "This place was made by God, and here, boys, everyone can speak to each other." "That's awesome! Was this place really made by God?" Colin asked, running towards the large angel statue. My brother followed, looking at the woman statue. "She's beautiful." "My grandmother," Timothy said, smiling. Jorge looked at my mother. "This is Saint Diana of Enoch. She is the first daughter of Enoch, and the last Jorge paused and smiled. "At least until Saint Timothy." Mom turned to Timothy and said, "Did it skip a generation?" Timothy's face fell as he looked upon the statue. "That's one way of putting it." Then he smiled at us. "I'm glad you're safe from Belial. For now. Let's get you a place to sleep. I'll work on getting you long-term accommodations, where you'll be out of Belial's reach." "Who is he? Is he after my husband, or us?" Mom asked. Timothy turned to us and said, "Belial is a powerful demon prince. Why he's after Fred and you is likely because Fred accidentally took something powerful out of the temple. Belial knows Fred had it, and he wants it. I've stored it back in here to keep it out of Belial's hand," Timothy sighs. "And I hoped once I did, Belial would give up. But it seems it's only intensified his search." My mother frowned, moving Colin and myself closer to her as she held us tight. "Under any other circumstances, I wouldn't believe you." Timothy smiled. "You're safe here. Don't worry. Belial cannot find you in this temple." He glanced at Jorge. "Why don't you show them to their rooms, and I'll see if I can find them a permanent replacement." Jorge smiled brightly. "At once, St. Timothy." Timothy chuckled. "You don't need to always call me that." And with that, he walked out the door, shutting them behind him. Jorge turned to us. "It isn't much, but there are some beds this way." He led us down the hallway where there was a series of unremarkable rooms, and each one had a few beds. The room was small, and the beds seemed crammed. I had to assume you wouldn't mind sharing a room for the night, considering what you've all been through. Thank you, Jorge, for everything, my mom said. My phone starts to ring as I walk down the street. I'm at the bus stop. It's Colin. Great. What's up? I said, picking it up.
Meet me at the airport. I'm coming home.
I took another drag from my cigarette at the bus stop. Did you ask the clergy's permission?
The Vatican is likely to deploy us any day now, so I don't think I need to ask permission. I've booked a flight. No, I'll be there in a day.
He explained. And what makes you think I'm not in Austin, where you just called me, telling me, hey, if you're in the neighborhood, want to expel a demon? I protested.
A flight from Austin to home takes about 2 hours, at the worst.
Colin shot back. I have classes in the morning. Some of us consider higher education versus, well, none to be important. To be honest, I was sure classes would be the last thing on anyone's mind going forward, if people were all acting like my father.
This is bigger than your education, Trevor. The fate of the world hangs in the balance.
Colin was getting testy now.
Skip the classes and the semester. Find a flight home and I'll meet you at the airport.
Another calm to drag me, as Colin's cheesy sense of duty spilled out on the phone. And what makes you think I'm in any mood to see you or Dad?
The fate of the world isn't enough for you to give a shit? Also, are you smoking?
I took a deep drag of my cigarette and blew the smoke into the mic of the phone. No.
You're a shit, you know that?
Colin spat over the line. Yeah, it takes one to know one, I tiredly shot back. At least give me some time to find a flight, okay? I'm eating ramen noodles every damn night, and it'll take some time to get a ticket.
I got a flight from Rome to home. You can manage to get one from Austin up north. See you soon.
And with that, the line went dead. He's a peach, isn't he, folks? Well, you can't choose your family, and Lord knows mine is beyond messed up. But the point of contention here didn't come from us crammed into a single room on some temple which may or may not have even existed. I still question that it was all in my head, a shared bit of imagination that Colin and I dreamt up, or it was real. After 3 nights or so in the temple, my brother had a working theory that had been driving Mother up the wall. We died, Colin asserted. Colin, shut up, I complained. Colin, for once I agree with Trevor. Enough of this, she protested. Hear me out, Colin reasoned. We died in the fire, right? An angel comes and takes us before we feel any pain, right? So we're here, as a family with Jorge, a guy who was never talked outside of me saying hi in terrible Spanish. My mother did that thing where she rubbed her temples in a desperate attempt to stave off a migraine that my 13-year-old brother was inducing on her. So we're here, and like this, purgatory, right? It's not good, it's not terrible. We're just here existing. Like we're awaiting judgment, Colin theorized. Colin, sweetie, if what you're saying is true and we are dead, then you couldn't feel pain. My mother gave her counterpoint by pinching his arm. Ow! Colin shouted. Now enough of this, okay? I don't want to hear any more of these theories of yours. Mom was going a little bit stir-crazy, and I couldn't blame her. There wasn't much to do here. No TV, no video games. Jorge found Colin and I a pair of Nintendo DS's, but the batteries died quickly. While those kept us distracted for a couple hours, Mom wasn't having such a great time. Did Timothy say when he would be back? Mom asked. Jorge shook his head, offering her a plate of corned beef and rice. No, Sandy, I'm sorry. She groaned. You don't know how to cook anything else, do you, Jorge? Jorge laughed and shook his head. No, Sandy, I am sorry. I could show you the kitchen if you'd like, but it's not well stocked. You're just a couple of living bachelors, aren't you? Jorge frowned a bit. Yes, well, yeah. Just then the doors opened and Timothy walked in. Sorry that took so long, he apologized. My mother was ecstatic. Oh, thank God. Tell me you can get us out of here. I've been going stir-crazy. Timothy smiled at us. Yes, in fact, follow me. I've got a surprise for you. With that, my mother grabbed mine and Colin's hands and rushed through the door. As we stepped outside, we weren't in our old house anymore. Rather, we were in a huge backyard of a different house. It was a pretty decent looking place, to be honest. It had a nice back porch, it was red with a gray roof, 2 stories, and the next neighbor looked like it was almost a quarter mile on either side. "Oh, whose place is this?" Mother asked. Timothy smiled. "It's yours, all yours, bought and paid for." "What?" Mom shouted. "We still had a mortgage on the old place. The insurance couldn't have possibly covered it." "Fred helped me. I'm helping him back. I have some connections with the government." He motioned all around us. "All of this is yours, in your name, far away from Belial's reach, soon to be farther, if Fred can do what I believe he can." She turned to Timothy, concerned. "What do you mean?" "Fred will take care of Belial," Timothy clarified. "But Dad isn't a priest," Colin shouted. "You don't need to be a priest to cast out a demon," Timothy explained to Colin. "You just need faith, powerful faith." Jorge got behind us, and the right tools. He was wearing a suit. "Timothy, we should get going so we can meet Fred." Timothy nodded. "You're right, we need to get going." He looked at us, handing my mother the keys. "As I said, it's all yours." He turned and walked into the doors, closing them. As he did, the door vanished. We were standing in the backyard, staring at what was our new house. With that, we ran to the new home. It was remote, somewhere in the Midwest. We weren't even sure where. Mom was busy going through all the cabinets, wondering who had such poor taste to choose all these terrible diningware and glasses. The fridge was fully stocked, and Colin and I found a PlayStation 3 in the living room. Despite the terrible internet, we were pretty stoked about the new house. It was a week later that my father showed up, looking like he had seen a ghost. Timothy had knocked on the front door, shouting, "Fred's here!" Jorge was in tow. I peeked into the foyer, taking a break from playing co-op Call of Duty with Colin. My mother rushed to the door and swung it open, smiling wide. Dad hugged and kissed my mother like he hadn't seen her in years. Then Mom broke the kiss and nailed him, hard, in the shoulder with a pretty solid punch. It was strong enough to make Timothy and Jorge wince in sympathy pain. "Never take a job again," she shouted. "It scared us half to death." A moment after calming herself, she asserted, "Also, we're going to go to church. Like, a lot." The color was coming back to my father's face as he just smiled at us. "I thought you were dead. You and the boys." If my mother had been angry at my father, the anger she shot at Timothy made it look like she was dancing for joy. "Oh, you did you?" She charged right up to Timothy and hammered his shoulder with her fist, hitting him once for each word she said. "Timothy, how dare you do that to him?" Timothy was, for his part, putting up a pretty weak defense. "I'm sorry, Sandy." "The boys are playing video games and they won't shut up about how the internet sucks," Mom asserted. Well, in retrospect, it was pretty bad. "Now get in here. I have to try to figure out what's for dinner," Mom said as she walked into the kitchen. I remember sitting back in the living room, Jorge joining Colin and me. "I'm sorry if we lied to your father, but St. Timothy helped us guide your father to vanquishing that demon." "Why do you call him St. Timothy?" Colin asked. "Because he's an angel," Jorge explained. "Well, mostly." "Mostly?" I asked. Jorge nodded as he explained. "St. Timothy's mother was an angel, but his father is a terrible man. He tricked his mother, you see, and that's how he got to her." He shook his head. "But St. Timothy is nothing like that." Colin nodded. "He saved us." Jorge smiled wide. "Yes, he saved all of us." With that, I just went back to playing Call of Duty, feeling like things could finally get back to normal. I couldn't have been more wrong, because it wasn't long before she showed up. The day seemed just like any other. Mom was making dinner and Dad just got back from a job he was working with some contractors, vowing to try to get enough money to start his own business up again. Then the knock on the door that changed my life for the worst happened. 3 knocks doomed no one like these ones did. "Fred, can you get that? I'm elbow deep in the chicken," Mom shouted. My father hefted himself up off the couch and headed towards the door. Colin and I peeked from the living room to the door, and, well, we were at the point where teenage hormones doomed us both. Standing in the doorway was a redhead in white robes. This is an understatement. She had a flawless face, not an ounce of makeup, but had these pale pink lips, bright red hair, and light brown, almost red eye. But red eye doesn't exist, so they had to be light brown, right? And I emphasize eye because I could only see one. Flawless bright red hair covered the other eye. When she spoke, it sounded like honey, her high voice lilting, almost shy. Hello, sir. I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Tasha Crestfall. My father, staring at Tasha now, kinda zoning out. I understand you might have met or maybe seen my brother. His name is Timothy. I've been looking for him for a while now. It might sound crazy, but I had a dream that he was here. This must sound... sir? Tasha seemed to notice that her appearance had entranced my father. She looked less than amused by his staring. Sir, she said again with some agitation in her angelic voice. Dad shook his head and cleared his throat. I'm sorry. Something distracted me, he stammered. Clearly, Tasha said, unamused by his response. As if my mother had some kind of sixth sense that my father was oogling someone, she was there in the foyer, hands washed, and smacked him upside the head. My father grunted, I'm sorry. Mom seemed ready to smack the crap out of him again. Tasha was far more interested in speaking to my mother. Oh, hello, miss. I'm curious if you have seen a young man named Timothy come through here. This house looks very familiar, and, well, I think he might be in danger. She clarified. I had a vision of sorts. I know this may sound far-fetched to you. Timothy? My mother stammered. No, he's not here. Not now. We hadn't seen him in some time. My father chimed in. If you're a demon, you need to tell me because I'm not doing that shit again. I'm not a malicious demon. Tasha seemed to stutter a bit, but she explained exasperated. Are you sure, my mother quipped? Because you appear to be seducing my husband by just looking at him. Tasha's cheeks turned bright red. Colin and I couldn't help but find that it made Tasha even more alluring. This is my very happily married husband, Fred. My mother started, giving a fake smile to Tasha. Tasha seemed to brush past my mother's defenses now, smiling and shaking her hand. It's nice to see such a happy couple. It was odd that she was wearing white gloves and a white robe. If you don't know Timothy, I'll be on my way. I'm trying to find him. Well, we know him, just not where he is now. Why, is something wrong? My mother asked. I had a terrible vision of him facing someone that I've dealt with before. She adjusted a strap attaching a staff to her back. I've been trying to find him, but I've not had much success. I had a vision of your house. Well, if you're a friend of Timothy's, I certainly can't turn you away. It's thanks to him that we're even alive, Mom said, pushing my stupefied father to the side. Tasha walked in now, smiling. Well, I'm glad Timothy is helping out people. Well, considering our family history, it could go either way. She beamed at my mother. I didn't introduce myself to you. I'm Tasha Crestfall. Sandra Macchione. I've seen you've already met my husband, Fred. She gave him a look that informed him that he was on the couch tonight. As I said, if you're a friend of Timothy, you're a friend of ours. Well, it's nice to meet both of you, she said as she looked around. Though I'm less of a friend of Timothy's, I'm his half-sister. Which half? My father inquired, frowning. What would that matter? Tasha asked, her smile fading. My father cursed under his breath. Well, you see, it all depends if you're the daughter of the angelic mother or the monstrous father. Tasha took the staff off her back and placed it down near the couch. Then she noticed us and smiled at Colin. Oh, hello there. She turned to my father. Are these your boys? You didn't answer the question, but yeah. The older one is Colin and the younger brother is Trevor. My father introduced us. Tasha sighed. Well, if you must know, not that it matters, I'm the daughter of the monstrous father. My father pushed himself between Tasha and us. I understand your concern, Tasha said, her hands up. but I'm nothing like him, nor do I agree with anything he does. Yeah, sorry. I'm not too convinced with the "I swear I'm not evil" thing, Dad retorted. Tasha crossed her arms under her chest because, well, she couldn't fit him anywhere else. Listen, my brother is in grave danger. I saw that he was facing a potent demon and I came to help him. That demon? I took care of him, okay? He's back in hell where he belongs, my father asserted. Tasha's eye grew wide. You? You sent Belial back to hell? Yes, and I can do it to any other demon, so mind your tone. My father continued staring her down. If you're his sister as you claim, why didn't he mention you? Tasha turned to pick up her staff. If you don't know where he is, I'll be on my way. My father grabbed something from under the coffee table. It looked like a small bottle of water and splashed her with it. Tasha stopped dead as the water touched her, and she dropped her staff. Her hair floated over her head a bit, and she turned to face us. Her left eye was glowing bright red now. As her hair floated higher, that was now glowing too. It revealed a horrific scar marring the other side of her perfect face. It looked like something had grabbed her face right where her right eye was, and tugged, ripping away the flesh that was, well, used to be there, and pulling any neighboring features away with it. Her scalp dipped toward her face. Even her ear seemed pulled closer to the front of her face. That water, where did you get it from? Tasha asked, touching the small wet spot on her shoulder. It's so potent. From Timothy, my father explained. He gave it to me from the temple. She leapt into the air like an excited schoolgirl and squealed with delight. The temple? The guardian temple? She rushed over to my father and grabbed his hands. He found it? Did Timothy find the temple? Where is he? Please, oh please, you must tell me. She tittered. My mother walked over and removed her hands from my father, turning Tasha towards her. Timothy was here several days ago, but he left through a doorway in the backyard. Without another word, but with a few squeaks of joy and elation, Tasha rushed out of the back door. She ran, jumped, and stumbled. Colin stared at her in lust. And I won't lie, I did too. My mother's comment still stuck with me. Great, now Boobzilla over there will give the boys wet dreams and terrible standards for their future girlfriends to live up to. My father seemed just as interested in watching Tasha run off as we were, so he mostly didn't respond. Tasha then fell to her knees in the backyard and started to pray. Oh, sweet Jesus, Colin said. I chuckled. Lord have mercy. My mother grabbed us both by the ears. Okay, that's enough, you two little horn dogs. My father scoffed and said, Huh. She opened up the door. We all turned around and saw the doorway opened, disembodied from any type of wall in the middle of our backyard. Thank God she's gone, my mother whispered. Oh no, her staff! My father frowned. What? She might come back for the staff. My father moved to get the staff in an attempt to pick it up, but he gasped in pain as he did. What the hell? It burnt me. Colin got away from my mother and grabbed the staff. I'll bring it to her. And with that, he ran off into the backyard. He was just unfazed. Colin, my mother shouted, get your ass back here right this instant. I'll get him, I shouted and ran after him. My father chastised from a distance, Trevor, no! But I didn't listen, because I was trying to stop Colin from doing something stupid. Miss Tasha, you forgot your staff, Colin shouted. But the doors were closing and she was already inside. Colin, I shouted, don't go in there. I tried to catch him, or at least get to him before the door shut. I somehow managed to make things worse, though. Before the doors closed, I leapt into the air and tackled him from behind. This had the effect of making Colin fall forward and slide into the doorway. It shut behind us, and I got that sickening, nervous feeling that you get when you break something expensive. Tasha's staff clattered to the floor, as we both did the same. This can't be, I could hear Tasha whisper. I rubbed my arm, grunting. Colin, you moron! Now we're stuck back in the most boring place in the world. Colin's eyes were wide as he was staring off at something to the side, where Tasha's voice was coming from. I looked down, noticing the remains of some white cloth shoes on the floor, and some other bits of tattered white cloth. Tasha's soft crying from the other room caught my attention. No, I can't meet Timothy like this. Why can't I change back? On the ground was Tasha, but she wasn't the same as we saw her at the house. She had horns, huge red and white horns coming out of her head, curled around the sides of hers. A pair of pinkish bat-like wings flapped against her body, trying to wrap around her shoulders and arms. On the ground scraping the floor were her feet. Well, not feet, but rather a pair of cloven hooves, each red, well, closer to pink. The red fur mimicked her hair color, covered her feet up to her legs, which were otherwise covered in white cloth. Where the fur was, the cloth was ripped and her pants were torn. Tasha even sported a spaded tail which twitched around on the floor as if it didn't know what to do. My father was right. She was a demon, and my brother and I were trapped with that demon. "Demon!" Colin shouted, the color draining from his face. I staggered backward from Tasha, looking for Colin, who was damn near pissing himself. "What?" I asked him. "We gotta get out of here," Colin shouted, getting to his feet and grabbing my arm. "Wait," I said, but he was already trying to get me through the now-closed door. Colin grabbed the handles and tried to open them, but it was shut tight. "Come on, open up!" Jorge's voice came from behind me. "Boys, what are you doing here?" Colin turned to Jorge, who responded to the commotion and came to investigate what was going on. "Jorge, demon!" He pointed to Tasha. Jorge's eyes went wide as he pulled Colin back, motioning to me. "Trevor, get away from it, come on!" Tasha whimpered. Her wings tried to wrap around her shoulders. Her hands were at her horns, tugging them downward. No, please, don't run." A tear rolled down her cheek. Either it was because I was young or because I remembered what happened to Belial when he touched my mother. She had drank the sacred water, and Belial's hand turned to ash when he touched her. I ignored Jorge and Colin, who were both backing away in fear. I reached out for the staff that Colin had grabbed. Jorge shouted, "Trevor, she's trying to trick you! Like a siren! Don't listen to her! Get away from her! Don't go near her!" I turned and walked towards Tasha, standing over her with the staff in my hands. You left us at our house." Tasha turned up to me, sniffling. "Oh, I was so excited about seeing Timothy." She crawled forward and tried to stand up, slipping and falling onto the floor in front of me. She sobbed and her face hit the floor. Even Jorge and Colin were letting their guards down. I leaned down, moving to help her up, but she swatted my hand away. "Don't touch me," she choked out. "I'm dangerous." I took a step back, not sure what to do. Tasha pushed herself to her knees again, this time with a lot of difficulty, and got into the kneeling position. "I don't normally..." She pulled one leg up, her hoof unsteady on the hard floor. She stood balancing out with her hands and even her wings. Her knees were wobbling as she managed to her feet. Her hoof slipped on the floor and she barely regained her balance. "I'm more used to normal feet." She squeaked in dismay as her hooves once again slipped out from under her, nearly toppling her over. I offered her staff, moving closer to help her stand. "Could this help you?" Tasha took the offered staff. "Thank you, young man." She pushed it on the floor, using it to steady herself. "Trevor," I said, and then I motioned to Colin, and that's my brother, Colin. Jorge walked over to us, confused. "You're unlike any demon I've ever heard of." "I don't enjoy being called a demon." Tasha winced as she tried to take another step. Even with the staff, she was very unsteady. I need to sit." Jorge nodded. "I can find the chair." He headed off into the hallway behind some plywood. Tasha soon slid down her staff, landing on the side of her hip, letting both of her legs lay off to the left. This is not how I imagined this day winding up. Colin walked over to her, kneeling down. "So you can't walk?" Tasha sighed. "I keep a human form. I rarely ever even sleep like this. I want to be a normal human." A tear rolled down her face. "I believe in God. I'm not a demon." Jorge came back with the folding chair. St. Timothy should be back soon, he said as he sat the chair down next to Tasha. Tasha nodded, using the staff to aid her in pulling her up to her seat. She tucked her legs in under the chair and had a great difficulty folding her wings. I don't even understand how to work these." Jorge looked her over. "I don't understand. How do you not know how to walk?" "I normally stay human. I can hold that form for about a week without turning into this. And when I do, it's only for a few hours." She poked her horn, flinching. "I don't understand why I can't change back into my normal human form," Tasha whimpered. "I thought this was a holy sanctuary. I'm unsure why it would force me to appear this way." Jorge's tone turned serious. Perhaps it's because this is a holy temple. You can no longer deceive us. Tasha frowned. What? This place shows our truths. Our languages are all understood. Our lies are removed. He gestured to her horns. This is what you are, no matter how much you try to hide it or run from it. The temple removed your illusion because it was a lie. Tasha held the staff close to her chest. Her face turned to the floor, and she whimpered under her breath, I'm not a demon. I frowned up at Jorge. I think you hurt her feelings. I was 10, okay? Give me a break. Tasha folded her wings over herself, hiding her face from us. I never thought I'd feel bad for a demon, Colin whispered. Jorge pulled out a small flask from his belt, moving towards Tasha. I am a man. I was born with original sin. If you were born a demon, you're born the same way. If God can save man, then he may be capable of saving you. God saves us all. Tasha's wings opened up, and she took the flask out of Jorge's hand. What is this? It's sacred water, from here, he explained. It has a purifying effect. If you're with God, it will calm you. Tasha took a swig from the offered flask. Her horns pulsed with light, as did her tail and wings. She closed her eye and leaned back in the chair. Yeah, it does. Jorge smiled. If the water doesn't harm you, then you are with God. The doors opened up behind us. I turned to see Timothy walking in carrying a bunch of groceries. He looked at Tasha, eyes wide. Xilich? Is that you? My phone rings again while I'm riding the bus, heading back to my dorm room. I'm tired, hungry, and very, very broke. And now I need to find a plane ticket, somehow. But it's Trish calling me. I'll share something with you. The world is an endless ocean of depravity and shit, peppered with these little islands of decency. Trish was that island for me. A close friend, a confidant, and a little drop of sanity in my otherwise absolutely insane life. Hey, Trish.
Hey, Trev.
Her voice came over, concerned, as always. Someone had to be. What's up?
What's up is everyone is freaking out. Our phones got hacked, some guy declared himself the officiant of Judgment Day, and I wanted to talk to you about, your situation and seeing how you were holding up.
I smiled as the bus came to a stop. So the entire world is freaking out and your first thought is, shit, how's Trevor taking this?
Yeah, asshole,
Trish responded.
'Cause it's, kinda right up your alley. Where were you anyway?
I sighed, lighting another cigarette as I started to walk toward my dorm. Just, running an errand.
You want to talk about it?
Trish asked. Nah, I'm good. I gotta get back home and make something to eat. I looked up at the exposed steps of my third-floor dorm and spotted Trish right there on the landing in front of my dorm room door, waiting for me. She was wearing her normal black knee-high boots and denim skirt, her tattered black band shirt and a leather jacket to cover that. She dyed her hair purple today. The week before, it was brown. She vowed that she would never let me see her true hair color. Trish had dark skin, even for a black woman, which made her blue eyes stand out even more with the stark contrast. Trish was a friend, and just that. I'm very certain that I friend-zoned her a while ago. Not that it would have mattered. Colin made it damn near impossible for me to find a woman due to his antics in high school. Besides, Trish had a boyfriend, some lucky bastard named Sam. Shocked there was no jealousy from the guy either, but that must be what trust is like. Not that I could tell, but if I had a catch like that, and I heard she was hanging around someone like me, I would come out swinging or demand she stop seeing him. Sam could just be a very chill guy. Either way, I know Trish loves him, and I'm more than happy to just be her best friend. Good, I'm hungry too, she hung up, leaning against the rails. I couldn't hide my grin as I ascended the steps. Well, you don't waste time. Unlike some of us, she pointed at the door, make open. I nodded and opened the door. The place is a mess. You're a college male. No shit. I swung the door open and flipped on the light. To me, it wasn't so bad, other than the pizza box still left out and the coffee table. Normal stuff. And the sheet laying on the floor. Tom, my roommate, had someone crash on the couch last night. Damn it, Tom, I muttered. The door closed behind me. So you didn't answer me. Where were you? I hated having to explain, but sometimes it helped having a rational opinion of things. I was out of possession. Ah, right. Do I need to guess who sent you? She asked, unsurprised, yet the disappointment in her voice was clear. Colin. I sat on the couch, taking another hit of my cigarette. Mm-hmm. Trish sighed, walking into the kitchen and checking the fridge. And you helped in this possession? I nodded, holding up my right hand with the iron ring on it. Yep, kicked it right out, so explain that. Did this person know what the ring was before you used it on him? She asked. No, I half lied. Technically, I said nothing until after I already placed it on his forehead. Did you make a show of it? Did you place the ring on his person where he could see it? I hesitated. Forehead. Ah, okay. Then what happened? He screamed, I explained. Did you tell him what the ring was afterwards? She asked, walking out with a jug of milk, fishing through the kitchen for a clean glass. No, during. Oh ho! Trish announced victoriously. So you said what you thought the ring was, and the person suffering a delusion bought into it, and poof, they're cured? I exorcised the demon. Yes, I affirmed, putting out my cigarette. How could you tell? She asked. I mean, he stopped thrashing around. So this guy has a seizure while you place that ring of yours on his forehead, tell him it's of Christ, and then when he finishes, what? He stopped and thanked you for expelling the demon? Well, he passed out. Ah, very convincing. She sat next to me, milk glass in hand. So you pressed the ring against a mentally unwell person's head, told him it was from God, they had a fit, and then they passed out, and you're convinced you exorcised a demon. I heaved a sigh. Trev, you know I love you, but you have to understand how insane this all sounds when you say it back to someone. This whole craziness with the angel who saved you and his priestess sister, it's all impossible. I wish I could show you. Trev, she placed her hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. When you were a kid, you experienced a traumatic event because of your father. I sighed, nodding. He worked for shitty people, and one of those shitty people tried to get back at him by burning down your house. To you, it seemed evil and demonic. He was a hitman. Remember your father telling you about basically scrubbing crime scenes? And his nickname in hell? Red Fred. I remembered my father confessing to me and Colin when we were a bit older. I didn't ask questions because I knew the answers. That's what he told us. So this guy comes after you to hurt your dad and still force him to do the job. You guys got saved by a firefighter or some police officer named Timothy, your angel, because the guy saved you. I'm sure he's a saint of a guy, but he's not a child of God. I nodded. And that woman you and your brother conjured up? Very teenage fantasy there, she teased. She's a succubus. Come on, Trev. I mean, I do have a thing for redheads, I guess. Trish chuckled. I turned to her with an eyebrow raised. Your real hair color isn't red, is it? Trish stood up and headed to the kitchen. My point is, you rationalized all of this horrible stuff that happened to you as a kid because to you, humans can't be evil, so it must be demons. She turned to me from the kitchen. Trust me, I'm the psych major. I was quiet for a few moments, waiting for Trish to respond. Colin is heading home. He wants me to go with him, I explained, and he'll probably want to go back to the temple to see her. She was silent to herself for a minute, leaning against the entryway to the kitchen, crossing her arms. Trev, it is possible to say no to Colin. I leaned back on the sofa. Yeah, you say that, but it's not. If you go back home to try to open the gate, as Colin puts it, and nothing happens, then what? I try to think about it, but what if it was just all made up like Trish thought? I will clean your horrific dishes and then maybe we can make something to eat. Okay? But this is the last time I'll do it for you, Trish said, smiling. I chuckled. You're the best. From the kitchen, she shouted, Glad someone thinks so. I closed my eyes and thought of the other woman in my life, the one who ruined it. I still remember the shock on Timothy's face when he saw Tasha. Wait, no. You couldn't be Xelich. Tasha, she shouted. Timothy, it's me, Tasha. She pushed herself up and hugged him. I haven't seen you since you were a baby, she grinned wide. You found the temple. It found me, he explained. Jorge walked over to the cart. I'll get this, St. Timothy. Timothy looked at Jorge. Thank you. Then over to Colin and I. What are you two doing here? Tasha beamed. I traveled to the last place I saw you in my prayers. It was their house. From there, I opened up the doors to the temple with prayer. She slipped again. Timothy caught her. Thank you. She did her best to try to regain her footing. So, what has the Lord been telling you? Timothy frowned as he closed the doors. I'm not sure what you mean. Tasha pursed her lips as she tested Timothy. You mean to tell me you haven't spoken with God? Timothy shook his head. No, not yet. Tasha stomped her hoof on the floor, then slipped and fell to her knee. Timothy! Timothy got down to help her up. I'm sorry, I don't know how. I can show you, Tasha explained. We just need to find the Guardian's Council chambers, and you need to sit on the seat of the scribe. That's when Colin decided that it was time to ruin our lives. I think I saw that room over here. He then dashed through the foyer to a large set of doors that I had never wanted to walk inside of while Mom, Colin, and I stayed at the temple for the first time. The doors were huge, almost all the way to the ceiling, made of the same marble as everything else. But the front door was ornate and intricate. Carved onto the front were hundreds of demons under the feet of winged angels. As the door reached upwards, you could see angelic figures fighting alongside these weird lizard-like creatures. At the top was a powerful-looking lizard creature, with a huge sword and a shield bearing a cross. Tasha and Timothy followed, me trailing behind. Colin, we should get home. Timothy nodded. Yeah, I'm sure your folks are worried. Colin glared back. And leave before we see you talk to God? No way, that sounds awesome! Tasha beamed at Timothy. Come on, I know you can do it. Timothy sighed and placed his hands on the doors. They opened up on their own, but inside was nothing but darkness. Jorge has lights in here somewhere. Tasha frowned. Shouldn't the temple have its own lights? He shrugged. I've found none. This place is, well, it's run down. But you're here and you can get it fixed up, I'm sure, Tasha complained. Jorge approached us, smiling. St. Timothy, I still have work lights set up inside. Jorge wandered into the darkness with no fear, and in a moment or two, a pair of bright halogen work lights illuminated the otherwise dark room. Inside was a huge amphitheater of sorts, rows and rows of chairs lined up on multiple levels of the room, all surrounding the front where we stood. It kind of reminded me of a lecture hall of some sort. In the center was a throne. It was a simple stone throne, but there it was. On the back was a symbol, a 6-pointed star inside of a hexagon, inside of a small circle. Within the star were more and more lines, echoing down to smaller and smaller shapes. At each point of the star on the outside was a circle, and within were 6 more, with the final circle sliced into 6 equal pieces by the lines of the other shapes. Tasha walked towards the throne in reverence, steadying herself on the chairs near the aisle while ascending. The seal of Enoch. That's it, the seat of the scribe! Timothy walked up to it. He put his hand on the top of the throne, looking rather nervous. I'm not worthy to sit where she did. Tasha hugged him. You're so modest. You're the heir to this title, Timothy. The throne is yours now. St. Timothy, Jorge interjected, drawing Tasha and his attention away. You guided a man who was morally questionable to God. You guided him to cast out Belial. I know you are worthy. You see, if you could guide a man to send Belial back to the pit, then Timothy, you are more than worthy of that seat. Timothy relented. Okay, I'll try. And he moved toward the throne and took a seat. Tasha cleared her throat. Timothy? Yeah? She motioned to his trench coat. Timothy's face went flush and he started to remove it. Sorry, I'm just too used to hiding it. His silvery white wings spread out behind him and settled on either side of the throne. Now pray to God to ask for guidance. Ask to hear their voice, Tasha said, stepping away from him. Timothy closed his eyes and went silent for a moment. Nothing happened, at first. Timothy shifted on the throne. I believe in you, St. Timothy! Jorge shouted from the lower seat where Colin and I stayed. Timothy took a deep breath and then exhaled. As if he was electrocuted, Timothy was soon sitting bolt upright, his wings spread out and they began to glow, silver creeping over his wings from the tips, taking over the white. The symbol on the throne pulsed over his head, illuminating with this blue light. Tasha shouted happily, "You're doing it!" Timothy began to mutter a few things, though they were a little bit hard to decipher. War, avatar of, burial, in the rain. Jorge frowned. What's he saying? Prophecies, Tasha smiled, though they may be old. Timothy's head twitched as he seemed to struggle. The Rus, the union of men, poisons all, the folly of man. Wormwood. His eyes shot open. There were no irises or whites, just a bright blue light. His back arched as if he was trying to pull himself off of the throne, but something kept pulling him back. St. Timothy? Jorge said, concerned. Now listen, men scream in movies all the time, but when they scream, it's not like a woman scream. Women in movies scream as these long drawn-out high-pitched cries of anguish or terror. Men in the movies scream as if someone had stabbed them, a scream of physical pain. There's that famous Wilhelm scream in the films, but those screams are men who were caught dying or caught by surprise. Timothy, however, he was trying to escape. I could see it in his face as he let out a gasp of fear, almost a loud groan. But still, you felt his suffering. The noise that ripped out of his chest next was my future definition of terror, a full gut scream of torment. It wasn't one scream either. He convulsed on the throne, trying to pull himself off. Each breath was another tormented scream of anguish. It looked more like he was on an electric chair. He pulled himself off, grabbing either side of his head, writhing around on the ground for a moment. "Timothy!" Tasha shouted, running towards him. The moment she touched him, he howled in terror, screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking as he did so. Jorge rushed towards Timothy. "What did you do to him?" Jorge shouted. Timothy was writhing around on the ground. Something was terribly wrong. He had got to his knees, his hands on either side of his head. He began to rock from side to side. "Stop!" he screamed. "Stop sobbing!" He turned to Tasha, his eyes wide, blood dripping out of his nose. "I can't hear." His arms dropped to either side of his body, limp. Then he leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Timothy? Tasha approached him. Jorge turned to Colin and me. "Boys, come on, help me." He rushed over to Timothy, and he pushed Tasha out of the way. "What have you done?" Jorge shouted. Tasha had a tear running down her cheek. I just wanted him to realize his destiny." "He may have been worthy, but he wasn't ready," Jorge chastised, and he moved over to Timothy. "Colin, Trevor, help me steady him." "I can..." Tasha tried to speak, but got cut off by Jorge. "You've done enough," he shouted, helping Timothy to his feet. Timothy moved like a zombie, his eyes wide, glowing blue. His face was emotionless. I walked in front of him to help, before one of his hands whipped out and grabbed me by the wrist, pulling me forward. His eyes stared into mine, and his voice and other voices spoke to me. "They must bring the new Nephilim to the temple and anoint them," he said, with several voices coming out of his mouth at once. Blood trickled from his nose still. Jorge grabbed Timothy's hand, but it was clamped on my wrist. I winced and nodded. As Timothy spoke so quickly, I couldn't understand him. But somehow, everything he said stuck with me. Levu Le Bruche, Ploiești, Romania, 1930, August 18th. Cyril Richard, Cornwall, United Kingdom, 1939, May 27th. Rosa Maria, Pisa, Italy, 1940, December 9th. Ifran Gawazi, New Abad, Afghanistan, 1958, May 25th. Annalena Torlini, Forlì, Italy, 1943, May 25th. Sarah Baker, Boston, United States, 1961, August 30th. Diane Frances Spencer, Sandringham, United Kingdom, 1961, July 1st. Clements Bahati, Lahore, Pakistan, 1968, September 9th. Regaze Aziz Ghani, Mosul, Iraq, 1972, January 20th. He took a breath. "These are the new guardians." He let go of my hand. I pulled back, falling against Tasha, both of us falling to the ground as she lost balance. Timothy grabbed either side of his head once again and started screaming. "Stop!" he screamed. "I can't think!" Timothy then turned to the throne of the scribe, and with both hands on his head, He thrust himself forehead first into the stone throne. Timothy fell to his knees, slumped forward on the throne. Tasha cried out, rushing over to him. "Please, God," Tasha shouted, "don't let my brother die!" Timothy was slumped on the throne, bleeding profusely from his head. As Colin and I looked on in abject horror, Tasha was sobbing by him, cursing herself. "Timothy, I'm so sorry." She turned to Jorge. "Are you a doctor?" His eyes got wide in shock. "St. Timothy," he whispered, likely assuming that Timothy was dead. Tasha closed her eyes, squeezing out one final tear. "This is my fault, so I'll pay for it." She shivered for a moment. "If this works, please tell him I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." It shocked Colin and me as Tasha pulled Timothy up to her and kissed his lips. Tasha's horns drained of their color. Her hair looked less luminous. Her wings seemed wrinkled and tired. After a few moments, Tasha's cheeks seemed less full. Wrinkles covered her once flawless face. She broke the kiss with a weak gasp. Timothy groaned in pain, as Tasha now slumped down on the ground. Her breathing was short and ragged. "St. Timothy!" Jorge shouted, rushing up to his side. "Let me help you." Timothy's eyes opened a bit and seemed to go back to their natural state. He looked over to Tasha and picked her up in his arms. Her body was limp and she seemed thinner than I recalled. "Timothy, I'm so sorry," was all I could make out of her whisper. Timothy turned to Jorge. "My body's well, but the rest of me isn't. But I know what to do." He glanced to him. "Help me to the fountain." Jorge helped Timothy move from there. Colin and I followed, as the three of them all exited the chamber of the Guardian Council and headed across the grand foyer. We made our way carefully down the stairway that curved to the left. Colin spotted a landing off to the right, leading to a pitch-black night sky. I had to tug him after me so we would keep up with Jorge and Timothy. I wasn't interested in leaving the only adults we were near. When we finally got to our destination, I stared up in wonder at what I saw. We arrived in a simple room, a series of small benches set up next to a rim of a large basin of water. The water glistened brightly and gleamed, illuminating the room on its own. What caught my eye was the source of the water. Running down a massive wall that reached so high into the air that I couldn't even see the top of it no matter how much I craned my neck, was water. It fell from the dark, high up in the air. It cascaded down the side of the wall in shallow waves. The marble ran down didn't seem worn or stained or anything. The sounds of the rushing water filled the room. Our footsteps didn't even echo. Timothy knelt by the rim of the basin and gently laid Tasha's body into it. "St. Timothy, what are you doing?" Jorge asked. "She sacrificed her energy, every bit just to give me strength, Jorge. But I need further healing." He heaved a sigh. "And Tasha does too." Her body began to glow white, her color coming back, filtering through her horns and her wings. Her face rapidly firmed, her wrinkles faded, and her lips grew full again. Her eyes shot open, and she let out a gasp as she sat up. She shivered and hugged her shoulders, hunching over. "What's happening?" "The water is sustaining you. Let it." Tasha shuddered again, her wings holding tightly around herself as her skin began to glow. "I'm so full." She tried to stand, but Timothy forced her down. "Timothy, it's too much." "They told me you need to drink until you cannot drink anymore," he advised. Then he became groggy. "Timothy?" Tasha's wings opened. She reached out for him, catching him in her arms. "Baptize me," he whispered. "I've never been baptized." She seemed more like herself now, though much bolder. She stood no longer wobbly on her hooves. Her wings unfurled, a white light glowing over the edges. Even her horns seemed to glow. Timothy could barely stand, and she lowered him gently into the water, her body radiating with yet even more light as she knelt in the basin. "The temple is sustaining me, Timothy," she smiled. "Heavenly Father, at this moment, your servant comes to you, Lord. Baptize your servant now in the Holy Spirit. May the anointing, the glory, and the power of God come upon your servant into their life now. May he be empowered for your service from this day forward." With that, she submerged him in the waters. Timothy's body sunk below the surface, and when Tasha pulled him back out, the blood on his forehead had vanished. Tasha lifted him up effortlessly. She stepped out of the basin. Her body lost its glow as she went out. Her hooves planted firmly on the ground now, sturdy and unshakable. Timothy slipped out of her arms, water dripping from him. He sat on a bench, panting, looking up at the ceiling. "Thank you." Her smile widened. "I've never been this. She leapt into the air. "Energized!" Timothy giggled. "I got a command for you too. Immerse me from our Lord." He closed his eyes. "Unlike you, I can't sustain myself in the waters, but they can heal me." Jorge hugged Timothy. "Thank God you're okay." Timothy weakly hugged back. "I'll live, but I need a rest." Can we go home now?" I asked, since the crisis before us seemed averted. Jorge smiled. "Yes, you boys should go home." Timothy shook his head. "I need time to recover. I'm pretty mentally drained. It makes it hard for me to concentrate." Tasha knelt next to him. "What happened there, Timothy? You frightened us." Timothy rubbed his head, turning to Tasha. "I got 300 some odd years of prophecies and edicts shoved into my head all at once. It's still bumping around in there." A tear rolled down his cheek. I can still hear him sobbing. Jorge asked, "Why is God crying?" "Well, it's this temple." Timothy motioned all around him. "It was full before. After Ragna and Zephiel attacked this place and murdered all God's servants on the physical plane, he's been helpless to help his children here ever since." Timothy dried his cheek. "God has been mourning his loss of the temple." Tasha turned to me. "Trevor, Timothy gave you a list. It sounded like a list of names. Can you remember them?" I thought back to the list and I could recall it perfectly in my mind. Even to this day, I still do. "Yes." Tasha hugged me. "That means we can please God and bring his temple back to glory." She smiled, looking up. "Don't worry, we can fix it." She turned back to me, grinning. "While we wait for Timothy to recover, I can teach you and Colin how to protect yourself from demons." Her eye glistened with glee as she looked at me. "Will you help me, Trevor? Will you help me restore the temple?" "Hello? Earth to Trevor!" Trish interrupted my reverie. I sat up. Yeah. "La La Land?" she asked, placing a bowl of soup in front of me. Inside the soup were noodles, an egg, and some floating bits of meat. "What Trish cuisine is this?" I asked, picking up the bowl. Glad you asked," Trish beamed. "Ramen noodle soup, chicken base, with the lovely egg dropped in the center, and little tiny hot dogs, cut up to look like..." I picked up the hot dog in my spoon, and noticed that the round end was untouched, but the bottom was split 8 different ways. "An octopus," Trish said triumphantly. "You watch way too much anime." I smiled and took a bite. "But this tastes great. And over 500% of your daily sodium intake." She put her feet up on the coffee table and began eating. "I want to meet the mere mortal who invented ramen and thank him eternally," she said, slurping up the noodles, in a manner that many would describe as unladylike. I chuckled and worked on cutting my noodles against the side of the bowl with a spoon. "Why did you cook for me?" "Because you're like a helpless squirrel I found nearly dead on the side of the road, and instinctively I must help you, or else you'll starve to death and rot in that dark recess of your little hovel," Trish said. "So, pity." "So much pity," she smiled at me. "I thought the pity part came from the whole I don't care if you're a registered sex offender thing." I chuckled, trying to make light of the train wreck of my life. Trish sighed. "Well, unlike everyone else who got your brother's mass email, I believe you. Also, looking into the event helps." I don't know what I would do without Trish. I quickly beat back the part of me that wanted to get closer, by considering the risk of ruining what we had now. "Now back to anime," Trish said, turning on the TV and navigating to Netflix. "Since we're talking about the world ending, let's put on something appropriate, huh?" "I'll never get your obsession with this show." I drank the rest of my soup broth as she loaded up Evangelion, Neon Genesis. "It speaks to me," she said, leaning back as the intro credits started. "Ray specifically. It's like she's a part of me." "You're a weirdo." I sighed and leaned back on the couch. "Yeah, well, it takes one to know one." After a few hours, I got groggy and closed my eyes. I was drifting off as somebody draped a sheet over me. My thoughts wandered back to the temple. Colin asked Tasha, how did you become a succubus if you are, all for God and stuff? Tasha had completely taken over Colin since the fountain incident. Timothy was recovering and Tasha was showing us how to use holy wards and how to spot a demon or a possessed person. Colin hung on every single word she said, like she was a prophet. Personally, I think she ate it up herself, but she seemed happy to teach us and she was enjoying Colin's enthusiasm. She trailed off for a moment before she closed her Bible and looked at us both. Remember when I told you that the most holy seals and practices are to protect you from retaliation from the demons? I nodded, because if you expel a demon without warding yourself, it might just possess you. Yes, she smiled, or curse you. She sighed. My father was a prophet once, but he lost faith. Despite this, he didn't lose his hatred for demons, and he kept expelling them from people, often killing them and warding the demon. My father didn't care too much for the possessed. Her wings wrapped around her shoulders as she reminisced. After doing this for some time, he fell in love with my mother. My sister and I were born conjoined. She lifted the hair on her right eye, smiling. Right here. Whoa, Colin leaned in. That must have hurt, he said as he examined the scar on her face. She laughed. Well, I'm too young to remember any of the pain. She let her hair fall back down. When we were growing up, we were normal children, and we weren't aware of our father's transgressions. It wasn't until we were 13 or so when our curses manifested. She shook her head. We had snuck out, as young teenagers do. She gave us an accusing look. Colin chuckled. That little suck-up. It was here that our curses first manifested. I was eating a normal meal, enjoying it at first, but then when I took the final bite, it tasted like ash. Soon I was vomiting up everything I had eaten. And the same thing happened to my sister. Tasha explained. Her skin burned in the sun and we had to hide, but the men who helped us soon suffered. Her hunger took over her. She drank their blood. For me, my hunger grew as well, and I desired physical touch. Before I knew it, I had my lips pressed against another man's and I drew his life force for the first time. Did he die? Colin asked. She finished him. Tasha leaned back, heaving a sigh. Leaving me, well, starving. It was easy for her, drinking donated blood or manufactured plasma. For me, it was difficult. I never wanted to harm anybody, so I ended up kissing a few people's hands here and there. So you never had a choice? I asked. Tasha shook her head. No, I never did. Not until I found God. My father found that my hunger had abated when I read. So, he locked me in a library whenever he could. That's where I read all of his different Bibles. And I found God. How did you come here? I asked. It had been bothering me, as Tasha talked about her father taking her everywhere. Her face fell. I told my father that I couldn't stand him anymore. Despite him vanquishing demons and casting them out, he had no remorse or care for the morals they infected. So I planned to leave. She smiled. It's funny, I didn't plan to come to Terra at first. I did have another place in mind, but that's when Timothy's mother approached me, needing help, and I changed my mind at the last minute. Timothy walked past us. She's not worthy of that title. Tasha frowned as he interrupted. You can't mean that. She loves you. Really? He turned around to Tasha. His look was cold. Loved me enough to leave me with only Eva? Ditching me with my father? Timothy scoffed. Pfft, yeah, I feel loved, clearly. He shook his head. I found a new mother while she was away. Tasha got to her feet, or hooves rather, a feat which was much easier for her now after she bathed in the fountain. Timothy, you can't just... A mother is someone who raises a child, whether or not that child is her blood, Timothy said. Then he smiled. But if you escaped with Rachel and Eva, I have to ask, how is Eva? Tasha smiled. She's fine, though she is 15, which I wanted to ask you about. You're fraternal twins. I'm not sure how this happened since you're much older. How old are you now? 25, Timothy thought for a moment. This is ominous. How so? Tasha asked. I came here via the temple's doorway. It opened for me and I traveled to Terra, rather unceremoniously. He pointed to Tasha. You, however, traveled from Father's ship, meaning it took you 10 years to travel here. Though it was an instant for you, that should mean that Father would be here, hot on your tail. Tasha shook her head. We changed our planned course after leaving, so Zephyl and Ragna won't have any signal from the ship. Until, well, now. Timothy frowned. That means we can expect them here in about 10 years. They'll be here for Rachel. Are you certain? Tasha asked. I thought Rachel and Father were on bad terms. He's not the one who's coming for her. Timothy looked to the door in concern. I know better than anyone that she would travel across the universe to find Rachel. He looked at Colin and me. Speaking of which, boys, it has been some time, and, well, I'm finally well enough to get you home. I got to my feet. Really? Awesome! Colin frowned. Can't we stay any longer? Tasha chuckled. It's been a little over a month, which, thankfully, is only about a week and a half on Terra. He looked to the doors, concern on his face. What is it? Tasha asked. I faced off against the demon prince Belial, but more so than anything else, I'm dreading facing the wrath of one Sandra Macchione. Timothy frowned. I'll get my excuses and apologies ready. Timothy walked off into one of the small rooms. Tasha smiled at Colin and me. Well, I guess you two deserve some parting gifts, don't you? She took her staff and removed the iron caps at either end. My father is an evil man, but he often sought artifacts that he identified as supernatural. This one was powerful, so pure he couldn't even touch it without being burned. When I first touched it, he was so surprised. She took out a knife and began to score it along the bottom of the cap. He made the wood from the cross that Christ hung on. And the iron? She popped off the ring of the cap, is the nails that were driven through his wrists and feet. She began to work on the other cap. Colin's eyes were wide. Really? Tasha nodded. Yeah, I'll give you each one for protection. But if you wish, you can use them to vanquish demons. She smiled. If you choose that path, remember, it's best to remain pure and keep your faith strong. The more pure you are, the more faithful you are, the harder it is for any demon to harm you. Does that mean being celibate like you? Colin asked. Tasha chuckled. Well, if that's what you want to do, that is one way to do it. She broke a ring off the second cap. But everyone finds their own path. Now follow me to the fountain, boys. We did as she asked, and she handed us each one ring. The rings were huge, far too big to fit our fingers. Place the ring on your finger, then place your hand into the fountain, she instructed. Colin was first, doing so without question or thought, as always. When he pulled his hand out, the result shocked him. Wow, it fits! Tasha smiled, turning to me. Your turn, Trevor. That smile will always haunt me. It'll help protect your purity. Those words still echo in my mind. I remember sinking my hand into the water and the ring fitting itself to my finger. I never realized it was far more of a shackle than a ring. Those will never rust, never tarnish, and they will always fit you, so long as you keep your faith in God strong, Tasha explained. Timothy shouted from the top of the stairs. Come on, boys, your mother's already gonna lay into me. Let's not waste any more time. We ran up the stairs and found Timothy with the door open already. I ran out first, happy to see my house. My mother was running outside of the house towards me. I jumped into her arms, having missed her for what was like a month trapped in the temple, with nothing to do but learn how to ward and banish demons. I was so worried, Mom shouted as she kissed my forehead. My father came walking out behind her. I told you they'd be fine. I wanted to call the cops, Mom glared, but your father insisted that it would be pointless. Well, it was, Dad said, walking up to Timothy and shaking his hand. Thank you for watching the boys. Timothy nodded. You're welcome, and I'm sorry. My mother walked right up to Timothy and smacked him right across the face. The slap echoed off the trees in the distance. How dare you? She glared. Those are my children, damn it! This past week I worried myself sick. Timothy rubbed his cheek and smiled. I know, Sandy. I got them back to you as soon as I could. He looked to my mom wistfully. I would never keep a mother from her children on purpose. She glared at him. Timothy, I am forever grateful for you saving us, but it's your fault we were ever in danger to begin with. Sandy, my father tried to interject. Mom held her hand up to silence him. Next time you show up, my children went missing for almost 2 weeks. She took a deep breath. So Timothy, if you please, I would appreciate it if I never saw you or your family again. My mother took another deep breath. So, while meaning no disrespect, please let this be the last time we ever see each other. Timothy just bowed and smiled at my mom. I promise I'll never come to you again. Or your family, my mom pleaded. Or your family. Timothy chuckled while hugging my mom. Timothy never came back after that. I almost wish he never showed back up at all. I woke up leaning on Trish's shoulder. You snore and mumble in your sleep, she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. I turned to the TV, watching a scene where 2 giant mechs were dance fighting in sync to defeat another mech. Suck it, Ezrafel, Trish grinned. She turned to me. I'm thinking for your neck's sake, you should go and pass out in your bed. Yeah, probably a good idea. I got up to my feet. You would have woken up soon anyway, because if you drooled on me, I would punch your teeth out, Trish warned. I laughed. Well, I have good timing. I walked off to my bedroom. Before I got inside, Trish shouted, She's not real, Trevor. She's just in your head. Just some fucked up level of perfection Colin uses to fuck you up. I knew she was talking about Tasha. I'll try to convince myself, I said as I closed my door to my bedroom and flopped on the bed. The ceiling greeted me as I moved my hand into my vision. The untarnished iron ring stared back at me. I tried to remove it, but it wouldn't budge, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. I closed my eyes and passed out. Protect your purity. Tasha's voice echoes as I drift off. I was dreaming about my first and last girlfriend. She was a grade below me, 16, with a late birthday to mine. This mattered more than I ever want to admit. I was 18 at the time, just turned 18. That number would torture me for the rest of my life, more than likely. I remember getting my first and last kiss from her. As I did, the horn from Colin's car blared, interrupting us. Quit sucking face, Colin shouted. We're gonna be late. Gloria, my would-be girlfriend, rolled her eyes. Your cockblock of a brother is here, again, she smiled. My parents won't be home till after 10, so maybe call me? I nodded. Sure thing. I ran off to meet Colin, getting into his car. You know, you could try not being an asshole. Colin grumbled, and you need to ditch that Jezebel. Gloria's not a Jezebel. She's a nice girl who I happen to like. You remember what Tasha said? We need to remain pure, he reiterated. Are you going to throw away our chance to save the world just because you got horny? Come on, Trev, it's a temptation. It's called being a normal kid. I shook my head. You've taken things too far. Colin turned to me. No, Trevor, we're not going far enough here. The next scene was me, tied to my bed. My wrists and hands tied by medical restraints. What the fuck? I shouted. Colin shook his head. You're a pervert even in your sleep. You're a pervert even in your sleep. He had my phone. What are you doing? I asked. Me? Nothing. You, however, he smiled. He showed me my phone with a picture of my junk on it. Just sent your 16-year-old girlfriend a dick pic. I sighed. She's not gonna care, Colin. Yeah, but her very conservative daddy might. Who you accidentally sent the same dick pic to? He shook his head. I mean, same initials, pops up on the messenger app. It's an easy mistake. The phone vibrated. Yikes, he is pissed. I struggled against the restraints. What the fuck are you doing, Colin? He plopped my phone at the end of the table and pulled up my shirt. Just future-proofing, okay? But really, what this is about is penance. He pulled out a rusty chain. Mom? Dad? I shouted. They're out for the night. He smiled proudly. And I need you to say it. I'll never go out with another girl again, okay? Fuck you! Colin brought the rusty chain down across my stomach. As he did, the metal clattered against the floor shortly before I began to scream. I sat up in bed, screaming and grabbing my stomach, gasping for breath as it was shoved out of my body. "Trev?" Trish ran into the room. I gasped and groaned, shaking, my eyes closed. I felt the chain striking my stomach, as if Colin was swinging it down on me again. I felt the wind knocked out of me. "Shit," I could hear Trish say as she ran to my side and hugged me, her head against my shoulder. "It's just a memory. Calm down, Trevor. You're having an episode. Come on, please. He's not here. It's just me." I gasped again. My body shuddered as I remembered another strike against my stomach. My hand grabbed at my stomach, pulling up my shirt. I could see bruises coming back, rust-covered scrapes and oozing blood. Trish held me tight, her hand on my bruised stomach. "It's just me and you here, okay? Come on, Trevor, snap out of it." I could hear Colin in my ears, echoing in the distance. "Say it!" I shouted while Trish held me tight. "I won't lie with the woman. I'll stay pure." I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's just the first of what's going to be a 3-part story, so let me know what you think. I plan on having the whole thing done before the end of the year, so here's hoping. I want to thank Dan R., Neophyte Games, Chaos X, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, JY Pyromancer, Hayden MH, Ethan A., Daniel H., Maximilian Charles P., Deneen H., and GoGo Cute Puppy LLC. Guys, thank you so much for your support.